Hey, you know what? I can probably get sound if I remember that this freaking headset I just bought has a hardware button on it. I did that yesterday. You'd think I'd get used to it by now. Here I am trying to go into settings and think, what could I have possibly screwed up since yesterday? I didn't change anything. Yeah, I didn't change anything. I didn't. I just forgot that there's a damn hardware mute button and I didn't have it on. So let's get down to it. Okay, so I've got pause on. Everybody hear me over the music okay? SoundSense trying to think for me again there for a moment. I don't want it on just yet. I got manual play going. Awesome. Okay. So, when we last left off, we'd finished our embark. We'd set up our profile, collected all the items we were going to bring with us, selected our dwarves, given them their skills, went through that whole pile of 4 hours of pre-embark nastiness that I like to get out of the way early on in the stream. Embark, pause the game, and quit. And that's where we kind of pick up. So, let's take a look around for a minute. We've arrived on our site. We can see a few trees. That's what these little circular things are. It's the trunks of the trees on this level. If I zoom out for a bit, we can see that there's a river and a small hill to the south down here, but mostly pretty well flat. So, we can build anywhere we want, and generally speaking, I'm probably going to try and build in roughly about this spot here. Not for any particular reason other than this will get in the way if I don't have to wall it over or fill it in. You could use it as part of your excavation. If I built here, I could just simply floor this over and call it a day. But I'm going to actually dig one out, so I want to do it a little over here. I want it reasonably close to the river for access for water later. You could burrow into the side of the hill. Water can be transported via pipes. That's not hard. Sunk cost fallacy. No, we're in for a penny, in for a pound on this one. Now, it doesn't look like this. I seem to remember we had more trees in this on our embark readout, but perhaps I'm wrong. Now, that looks like hippopotamuses. Hippopotami? Large ruminants that will kill dwarves dead. Yeah, those guys. So we're going to check, but I'm pretty sure that's exactly what they are. Oops. Okay. Good God, has it really been that long? Oh, they're down below. They're in the water. That's why I can't see them. Yep, there we go. Hippo. I was like, why are they not showing up? Yeah, okay. So they're definitely a problem. Hippos generally aren't threatening, but if your dwarves go say hello, they're not inclined to be nice. So imagine the size of a dwarf, imagine the size of a hippo, and you got why that's a problem. The hippo just has to get a little unhappy, and there's going to be a major disaster. So we're going to give them a wide berth, at least to start. Hopefully they'll wander off somewhere other than our map. Um, Other things you could do with them, if you started with a hunter, you could try to get brave and hunt one of them. I don't recommend it, but you could. You don't really have control over what your hunter hunts other than to disable his hunting. So it's kind of up to him what he decides to go after. It might be peahens one minute and unicorns the next, and next thing you know, he's off after something that's probably going to get him killed. Pre I'm just going to point out that while technically they aren't as bad as they used to be, I've had giant monkeys come out of the woods and kill my dwarves, and they technically aren't hostile either. They were just after my goodies, and the dwarves just happened to be between them and the anvil. So, this being a savage terrain, hippos aren't exactly unexpected. We'll just give them a wide berth, we'll be fine. So, we're going to fell a few trees, start building a basic dugout, basically. It's not going to be much more than a room in the soil to start with. Um, we'll connect that up to what will become our main fortress, and then we'll use the burrow to temporarily store the wagon materials while we finish things off. Um, in an evil terrain, especially, one of the primary things you're going to want to do is get your stuff below ground as fast as possible. Now, it's the hippos aren't that dangerous. It's not. I'm not doing that because of the hippos. And in this case, part of the reason I want to get this stuff below ground is I'm going to set up a crude mason workshop, metalsmith, the basic industries we're going to need to basically get off the ground. And when the time comes to have the majority of our base dug out from these miners that we're going to set to motion here in a moment, we can just connect these two rooms up, floor this over, and the main access is wherever we put it. And in the meantime, they have close access to the wagon where all the goods are. We can set up our initial temporary stockpile there when we move our industry somewhere else. Now, all of this is a lossless process. You don't lose anything if you build a workshop and disassemble it later, move it somewhere else and reassemble it. All of that stuff is preserved in Dwarf Fortress. It's lossless. So there's no harm in relocating things to somewhere that would be more efficient, more effective, or not broken if you blocked something off you didn't mean to. Don't hesitate to redesign your fortress, move it somewhere else if you really have the time, patience, and dwarves to do it. Um, as long as it's inside this map, you can move your dwarves anywhere you like. In addition to this, one of the things I like to do for new players is kind of give you a peek. So normally when you go diving into the earth, it's all dark because you haven't explored this. And to kind of explain for new players how all this is laid out underground so that they'll have an idea of why I'm building things the way I'm building them later on, I'm going to give you a peek behind all of what's hidden in the fog of war there. Now, it's important to note that I have the game paused. We haven't done any exploration yet. No caves or anything's been mapped out or explored. You can kind of bone yourself if you don't unreveal this before you unpause it because your caves won't properly be explored. You'll never get the cavern discovery notices, which is actually a problem. So this first layer is sand. There's a few minor things, kind of dug in here or there. Take a look and see what those are. Probably some sort of stone. Oh, that's the roots of the trees above them. Okay, no big. Level below that's fire clay, silty clay, and then we get down to the actual interesting stuff. That is to say, the stone. Now, this is pretty much what layers are going to look like in general. It's going to be the layer stone overall, so this gray stone everywhere, with small clusters of gems and uncommon minerals, veins of metals that appear in veins, and possibly clusters if you're in an environment that has them. Doesn't look like we have many clusters here. And as you dive, you're going to notice that these kind of appear in like a grid. So, for example, there's a grid, and you're going to see something in that grid all the way down, pretty much. Dwarf Fortress effectively divides its overworld map into these tiles, which are about 16 by 16, if I remember correctly. And so each one of these is kind of generated separately. You're going to notice that within boundaries, they tend to have the veins vertical from one another. Now, if you dive far enough, you're going to get to the caves. This is Cavern 1. And it goes for a couple levels down, so you can see as it expands out. This is flux stone, so it doesn't look like we have a lot of flux stone. Oh, there it is. We're gonna have to mess with the caves to get our flux out. And then there's the 5 levels between that and Cavern 2. Here's Cavern 2. As we continue to dive down, you can see if we'll zoom out here and so we can get a better picture of the whole map. There we go. As we continue to dive, there's going to be space above Cavern 3, and it looks like Cavern 2 actually intersects. See this little downward path here? Looks like it goes all the way down and touches Cavern 3. Yep, there it is. So it touches Cavern 3. Now the blacked out spaces are spoilers, so I'll leave them blacked out for now, which is why I used reveal and not reveal all. Um, it hides certain things when you do this. So that area is for exploration later, but that's where our veins are going to be the good dive into the earth, all the way down into the bottom of the world. Fantastic. This is nice. This will work. Okay, so let's go back to the surface for a moment. Let's talk about how we're going to lay things out. We'll hide the map again because I just wanted to kind of show you guys how you can see what your map really looks like. And your map will generally look similar to this. It doesn't matter where you embark. The stone is laid out pretty similarly. You might have a different layer stone, you might have different veins, you might have different gems, but it's going to be kind of all of the same pattern, if you will. Um, you're going to find if you have clusters, they look like big ovoids with a single material, and maybe the veins run through the ovoid. The ovoids might rotate, but the ovoids make the grid pattern particularly clear because the ovoids never intersect the uh, map tile boundaries, if you will, and they might rotate in place as you dive through the world, but they never uh, shift over left or right to deviate outside their world gen tile, if you will. Okay, so having done that, and without moving the map any further, we're going to unreveal this thing. Generally speaking, I don't play with reveal on, but it's nice to show new players who've never seen how the world is really laid out, how the world is really laid out. Uh, so now we've taken a peek. We kind of know how things are going to be looking underground. I don't really care where any particular stone or ore is. We'll discover it all as we go down. The first order of business is we have a very limited supply of coke. We have enough materials to make a few bronze items, but we have a limited supply of fuel to power our smelters and forges. So we need to have wood burners producing charcoal from logs. We need to start making logs. In order to make logs, we need to have an axe, and unlike previous versions of the game, wood axes no longer qualify. You cannot cut trees with wooden training axes any longer. That's not effective. That was a hell of a shock the first time I found out, let me tell you. A lot of us players were used to abusing that particular trick. You take a log, make it into a training axe, and off you went. That's a whole lot cheaper than spending 68 uh, dwarf bucks on a copper battle axe, or bringing the bronze and making it on site, both in time and in terms of dwarf buck expenditure. So we've kind of compromised here. Since I don't have ready access to coal, and since we don't have any way to bring it with us, we're going to have to make charcoal. There's no other option. Somewhere on this site, I didn't go through every mineral because I don't really want to spoil myself. Somewhere on this site, there's bituminous coal because I'm pretty sure we prospected that last session. Don't quote me, but I'm pretty sure if you roll back, you'll find it. Which means that there would be coal on this site for us to find and then later process. But to get us started right out of the gate, to get our initial ores made into bronze bars, charcoal it is. So the first thing we'll do is we'll dig out a small base, set up our initial industries, start felling tree, or make a few bronze battle axes, start felling trees so we can power our furnace cycle in future. Um, while the miners dig out the fortress that we're going to design. So before I get started, if anybody has any questions on the stuff I've covered, now's a good time because once I get started, it's going to be a couple of minutes while I'm designating large sections of fortress. I want to say this is Savage crap. You would ask me that, wouldn't you? I want to say it was a swamp, but don't quote me. This looks awful dry to be a swamp. Too few trees, too dry. So we must have embarked somewhere a little drier than that. Grassland, maybe, because there's really not that many trees on this map. It's pretty barren, and all of the ponds have already dried up. So it's hot and equatorial, whatever it is. Hard for me to tell you exactly because I don't honestly remember where we embarked. I forgot since last night. Yeah, I'd have to roll back, and I'm not going to do it right at the moment. So let's get started. So I'm not going to cover, for those of you who are new to the game, I'm not going to cover the individual commands in the menu. Hit the tab key, bring up the menu, look at it. If you want to hide it a little bit, you can put it over on one side and you can keep it up while you do your digging and such. For me, it's mostly just a distraction. I've done this long enough that a lot of this stuff is kind of going to be muscle memory, and I probably won't have to look too often. Maybe some of the newer stuff. Um, to get started, you're going to do designations, which is D for digging. And If you have an axe, you can immediately start chopping trees, but we don't. So we're going to start with downstairs. Now, all of these are keyboard designations. You can do this with a mouse, but I'm not comfortable enough with my mouse hand being steady to do this for Dwarf Fortress. It's doesn't I don't think it's a desert. I think it's a grassland or a savanna. In fact, I'd bet on savanna because it's hot and equatorial. Hippos would make sense in a savanna. Few trees, limited herbs. Yeah, I'm betting savanna. And down here, there might be a different biome because we kind of crossed over on the boundary here. If we go up, it looks like maybe we have a different one there. But yeah, this I'm betting this is a savanna when we go back and review the VOD, just based on how it looks. Okay, let's dig. Okay, that should give our miners enough to keep them busy for a second. And once they've gotten, in fact, I'm going to do one other thing. I'm going to force them to work on this room before we do anything else. So I want to make sure that they don't start on the main fortress until we've finished this temporary room. We might reuse this for something later. It's dug out in soil, so I mean, it might make a good alternate farm for like surface crops or something maybe down the road. But realistically, it's primarily just a temporary place. It's directly adjacent to the wagon, so we can quickly move the stuff underground as we get enough space to do so. Awesome. There we go. All right. So when we unpause this, our miners should take off. But let's talk about something else for a moment before we let these guys loose once and for all. Let's talk about our therapist. We'll connect it to Dwarf Fortress. When Dwarf Therapist starts, it will automatically try to connect, and it will give you this really nasty sounding warning about you don't have a fortress open, blah 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 blah. Don't sweat it. If your fortress isn't already open when you load Dwarf Therapist, you just hit cancel on that, hit the connect button once you're ready to go. It will load all of your dwarves, information about them, their skills, their preferences, what they like, what they don't like, what their mood is, what they're doing, how they're feeling, what things they've done recently that made them happy or sad. All of this information is here, and it is an enormous quantity of information. It's all at your fingertips, and it's hard to present all of that information all at once in a way that makes sense. So we'll start off with really basic stuff, and as we go along, I'll start working on in some of the more complex things like custom professions and uh, roles for maybe we'll see at some point. Um, Generally speaking, I use a fairly minimalist implementation of Dwarf Therapist. I basically set up a collection of custom professions. I basically set up a set of custom professions and then uh, assign my dwarves to those as I need labors done. Typically speaking, a custom profession is going to have like one mutable skill and then maybe some unmutable stuff to tag along with it. I'll have skill sets specifically for haulers who are forbidden from basically doing anything important because their entire purpose is to move shit around my fortress. Soldiers will have their own unique, distinct skill sets. Um, all of that's displayable here. Who's in the military, what other skills, and other skills is all those mathematician and logician and all the things used to make books and the things that don't have a huge impact on the game necessarily, but which will come up from time to time. attributes is basically what you'd expect, mental and physical attributes for the dwarf. Roles are the things that they are theoretically best at right now. The catch here is that as a dwarf gets better at something, their skill tends to overwhelm other considerations, generally speaking. So as long as they're not unhappy doing a particular labor, then generally speaking, you're usually better off to go ahead and allow them to do whatever you need done rather than worrying about what they might like. Now, if your fortress has got 200 people in it and you're sitting there looking for something to, kind of max out for your fortress, well, then at that point, it might make sense for you to start looking at how your roles are playing in. Are all your dwarves doing jobs that make them maximally happy? It's possible to get kind of a boost towards your stress by giving dwarves jobs that they like, and that way kind of help to offset some of the problems that exist in the current version vis-a-vis stress. But yeah, we did not name our dwarves last night, and the reason we did not name our dwarves last night is because I only have one donation received, and the only person who currently has a dwarf who is named after them, if they'd like, is Valdemar. The rest of you haven't donated. $10 will get you a migrant, $25 will get you one of the starting 7, not just in this fort, but in all forts from here until the end of the 33 days. Here's the catch. Once the $25 starting 7 guys are gone, everybody who donates at that level still gets a migrant. So, early cat catches the dwarf. It's for charity, guys. It's not for me. You're not giving me that money. It's for sick kids. Go donate for sick kids. Dwarf is an extra. All right. So now that I've given you my little sales pitch, it also covers animals, although I don't usually use it for that primarily. So it'll tell you, information about your animals, and a lot of this stuff isn't super important, but you could use it if you needed to geld your animals in mass, for example. For example, if you did, um, it'll tell you information about their health and so forth. It could be useful. We're probably not going to get into it too much tonight. We're probably not going to go that far. Labor's Full is going to is where we're going to spend most of our time, and let's talk a little bit about breakdown. So you'll notice that a lot of these things have different colors, and the intention is that these things are somewhat related. Um, Mining is specific to mining. Carpentry, bowyery, wood cutting, and wood crafting are all wood related materials. Stonemasonry, stone detailing, and stone crafting are specifically dealing with stone. All of these are animal skills. This is medicine. These are farming and farm operations. I'm not sure why these are technically uh, different, but they all kind of get done by the non-skilled dwarves because nobody really cares. Plant processing and plant gathering are plant processing jobs, cooking and brewing are kitchen jobs, and so forth, all the way down through the whole list. All of your dwarves' skills appear here, and you can change whether they appear as a number, which I prefer, or as a fill in the box, and depending on how filled they are. And you don't even have to do the link. Right down below the stream, right down there below it, there's a big button in green that says "This is the spot." I get a notification that shows up on the donation page, and I'll start naming dwarves after you after that point. That's how it works. Very simple. You just got to let me know what you want them named after. As long as it's not too awful, pretty much anything will go. Yeah, asking me for something I'm not going to give you just means you donated to charity for nothing. So, keep it reasonable. Okay, so our dwarves, let's see. We'll sort these guys by mining skill, so it puts our 2 miners at the top. We have 2 miners. We took a mason, we took a carpenter. This is our farmer who doubles as our armor smith. Our mason is also doubling as a furnace operator and a wood burner. And we had one guy who was a weaponsmith who we also gave furnace and wood burning so that we can get kind of our metalworking stuff done early and get those guys switched over to wood burning to make charcoal and surplus to run our furnaces long enough to get our basic supplies up and running. Okay, so let's take a look. So some folks are all rushing in on that. That's awesome. Fantastic, guys. Oh, definitely got a donation here. Yeah, 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 yeah. So, Valdemar wants a dwarf named Valdemar, and our next guy wants an expedition leader, huh? Okay, we can do that. You got a particular nickname you want for your expedition leader there, guy? That works. So our expedition leader is highlighted because he's the only noble we have. Sorry, I want to make sure I spelled it correctly there. And doesn't look like we had a preference on old Valdemar there, did we? Hmm, okay. Minor it is then. Now, Dwarf Therapist works on a system that might be a little strange for some folks who haven't worked in a batch computing environment before. It basically piles all your changes over here in a queue. It doesn't actually make them right away. So you can undo these changes right away without changing anything in Dwarf Fortress. Technically, over here in the other world, Dwarf Fortress is still running if I haven't paused it. Double check that I actually did. Yep, still paused. We're good. Okay. So back over here, we can make as many changes as we like and then just apply them on one batch. If you're getting a big migrant wave, for example, Dwarf Therapist will tell you what the dwarves are before they technically even appear on screen, which is a technically kinda sorta an advantage in the sense that you can kind of sort your migrants before they show up and they're technically ready to go right as soon as they walk on. But it's not really that much of an advantage. It's, 10 seconds before they all show up and then you're done. So, let's talk about what we don't have here that we need. So we don't have architecture, and this is one of those naughty things that it will escape you over and over again when you first start a fortress. Your dwarves won't be set up for architecture. Now I don't have any skilled architects, so frankly, right now, who does the architecture doesn't matter to me. And I'll go ahead and commit the changes, which also nicknamed the dwarves at the same time that it made everybody set for architecture. So now if I go into Dwarf Fortress and I go through the labor menu, everybody has architecture turned on. But rather than navigating through all the menus to figure out where it is, click a button, away we go, done. Solved. Okay? Uh, Architecture is necessary because certain of the workshops we're going to be building require an architect as one of the stages in their construction. Smelters and forges, I believe, definitely smelters, I'm not sure about forges, require an architect. Not sure about, now that I say forges, I don't think forges do, but smelters definitely do. Any furnace pretty much does. The architect basically is getting your airflow right, is the premise. Uh, the architect will show up, do a little tinkering, and the next thing you know, the mason will come along, build the building, and it's all done. But with no architect, they'll move the stuff to the building, and it'll just sit there forever, waiting on an architect. Doesn't matter that you have somebody with the skill to build the building. The architect has to come along and put his stamp on it first before anything's okay. All right. So I think we've got everybody pretty well set up to get us started. We don't need a whole lot of these things. Eventually, we're going to have to enable wood cutting on some folks because right now, none of our people are doing wood cutting, and we have a carpenter and two furnace operators who are going to need wood. With the downside that this is a map with very little wood, so yeah, this is going to be interesting. Probably going to need those cave trees sooner rather than later, I'm thinking. Okay, so we've got our temporary fortress designated out here so we can get things underway. We've got our dwarves all assigned to their labors. We turned on architecture because that's the nasty gotcha that always leaves me sitting here stumbling over my own thumbs while I try and figure out what I forgot. Our miner here grabbed a pick and he's going to get to work. Notice that this is flashing now, which indicates that he's on the way to it. Also, our biome rains human blood. So, yay. Having your biome rain human blood initially sounds really cool, but if you can imagine standing outside being drenched in a constant deluge of human blood and think that that's a good thing, that would be nice, you probably aren't a dwarf. They're not going to be happy about this. Okay, so now we've got our temporary burrow here, our temporary burrow space dug out. We'll go ahead and get the miners working on the rest of the fortress just by telling them that they can start on the next section. They'll go ahead and get working. Now, let's go ahead and build some workshops that we're going to need. In particular, we're going to need a metalsmith's forge, which will use our fuel and materials to produce weapons and armor. We're going to need, in the smelter area, we're going to need a smelter and a wood furnace, at the very least one of each. The smelter will convert our ores into bars, and the wood furnace does about what you'd expect. It makes wood into not wood that we can then use to burn. The elves won't be real happy with that, but they can bite it because, frankly, I gotta have fuel from somewhere. So, suck it. Um, oops. We'll unpause again, and our guys will responsible for that should come along here and start moving the materials down the staircases. This may take a second, because this is heavy stuff. These stones weigh a bit, so you moving them over long distances will slow your dwarves down drastically. You'll notice it takes them forever to walk that really short distance while they're carrying that giant boulder. Couple of steps, and here's our metalsmith building our metalsmith's forge. We'll use that in a second. Here's our mason, who's done his own architecture because we have him enabled for it. He's building our wood furnace. Okay, so first things first, let's go ahead. Sorry, we need to let the smelter do his thing first. We need the smelter in order to make the bars into something useful first, and then we can take advantage of this metalsmith forge. All right. So we'll query this bad boy, add a new task. We're going to make some bronze bars out of ore. This will combine one copper ore, one cassiterite ore, and it will make a whole pile of bronze bars. And so we're going to do that twice, once for each reaction. And it's not to, notice I'm not making copper bars and then tin bars and then making bronze bars. I'm using the ore directly. This is a this is a more efficient way to make your bronze than making it into bars first. The advantage to making the bars first is, for example, if you had a magma furnace where fuel doesn't matter, you don't care about the efficiency at that point. You can simply make everything into bars and then convert it later. You lose a little bit of time, but if for some reason you need to make something out of copper specifically, you haven't lost much. You'll have the copper on hand and can immediately convert it. Whereas if you're converting these ores directly to bars, there's no intervening step. There's no point where you're left with copper in hand. The upside is that it uses a lot less fuel to go directly this way. The downside is that you don't get the middle step if you need it for something, like, say, a noble who likes copper and needs it right now in his workshop or in his bedroom. So we brought about 4 units of coke along with us. That should be enough to get 2 units of bronze bars, and this will be a slow process too because the each one of the units of stone that's necessary for the bronze is basically like hauling a boulder. So he's going to haul 2 boulders downstairs and then haul a unit of coke. And the unit of coke he's going to move a whole lot faster. So there's the copper, or the cassiterite rather, and he's going to bring down our copper here. Come on. I'm going to have to get them indoors. Okay, our miners have finished up here. So let's dive into this a little bit and see how far down we have to go before we get some stone. There's some stone. That'll work. Sand, 1 stone, 2 stone. Let's go down another level. Oops. Okay. The dig circle command is nice. It allows me to just simply dig a circle of a particular size. Once you've designated the size and type, in this case, filled 15, you could just use dig circle by itself, and you get the same result. Um, for yeah, assuming they haven't changed it, you can actually bind dig circle to a hotkey if you're going to use it regularly, and typically I would do that just for ease of use. There's a hotkey for it, but I don't honestly remember what it is off the top of my head. I'd have to double check. I've been using the hotkey method so long, I've never really looked it up. All right, so if we got our bronze moved downstairs yet? No. Okay, so look at them digging out the that what will become our dining room. Pretty sure that's coal we just hit. Yes, indeed, bituminous coal. Looks like bronze is back on the menu, boys. Congratulations, guys. The Dwarven civilization has discovered coal for the first time ever. Now, I wish I were kidding, but our civilization apparently doesn't have access to it, so this is apparently the only coal seam that dwarves know of in existence. Oh, and it looks like that's probably the limonite right there, too. Maybe. Yes, indeed. Forget bronze, boys. Iron just went on the menu. But no, we won't really forget the bronze. We're actually going to use that because we can produce it now rather than waiting for the iron to be extracted in quantities. And he's on to his second set. So now we've got one set done, which means we have some bronze bars. Let's go ahead and add a weapon made of bronze. And in this case, we want a battle axe. In fact, we want two of them. So we're actually going to add two of them. And we're going to go over here and add on repeat. Make coke from bituminous coal. And we're going to put that on repeat because that can be done forever. 1 unit of coal adds something like, I don't know, 4 or 5 units of coke. It's the, overall, once you finish with using the 1 unit of coke to make another unit later. Um, it's bituminous coal is by far the most prodigious fuel or productive fuel in terms of mine it out and get more. And wood is the least. Lignite is dead center in the middle. So now that we've got our dining room dug out, I think let's go down and check. Have they finished yet? Are you done yet? Nope. As soon as this is done, I'm going to build a meeting area here so we can get them out of that fucking human blood rain. I expect them to be able to take at least a little blood rain. Although it's been raining human blood since we arrived. Wow, did the metalsmith already get done before the guy could actually make the coke? That's fucking hilarious. All right, hang on, let's pause this a sec, take a look. So if we look inside the smelter here, here's our bronze bars, and there's our two bronze battle axes. The good news is we can now cut trees. The bad news is our metalsmith got done so damn fast that our guy making the bronze bars didn't have time to finish and go grab a unit of coke to make the actual coal into coke. So right now our fuel cycle is stalled for a moment. Not crucial, but we can fix it here in a second. The first thing we're going to do is cut down a couple of trees. So we got to designate the trees. That's easy enough. But that alone isn't going to get your trees cut. You got to have an axe. No axe, no cut. We've got the axe. We produced that already. You have to have folks who have the wood cutting labor, which we don't have. We're going to assign that in Dwarf Fortress here in just a moment. And you have to designate the trees like we're doing now. So we're going to designate all these little trees who are closest to us. There aren't that many on the map, so we'll just have to make do with what we get until we can do something better. We're going to try and avoid using wood for anything other than beds, because frankly, beds are pretty much the only thing you can't make out of something other than wood. So someone was asking what type of trees we have on site, and since I don't honestly know, I'll take a peek. Generally speaking, I'm not particularly picky. Looks like saguaro, so this is the Badlands section we're looking at here. These are not technically trees, they're giant cactuses. That's a feather tree. Cactus, cactus. Yep, looks like a lot of cacti. All right, so we could unpause, but our trees would never get cut. Over here in Dwarf Therapist, we need to assign the wood cutting labor. Now, there's a couple of snags here, and these'll be the bane of new players, so it deserves a mention here before I go too much further. Unless it's been fixed, and I don't believe it's been fixed yet, and I don't expect it to be fixed in the next version, because this is one of those things Toadie's going to put off until the end of time. Wood cutting and mining and military duty interfere with one another. Basically, Dwarf Fortress puts an invisible uniform on your miners and an invisible uniform on your woodcutters, and your military guys are going to be wearing an actual uniform. And these things actually conflict with one another. So your miners, generally speaking, aren't going to be in the military unless you don't give them any other equipment, and your woodcutters are not going to be in the military unless you don't give them any other equipment, or you're going to have issues where they're swapping in and out, like things where they have to have two different axes, one to use with their woodcutting equipment and one to use with their military equipment, which sounds good until you realize that they're both basically the same axe anyway. So we'll turn woodcutting on, but we won't do it for uh, the miners because that would conflict. We could do it for our furnace operators, but they're going to be busy. Our carpenter is going to be busy making stuff out of wood, so the first choice I would use is our grower. He's not got anything to grow at the moment because we haven't started planting anything yet. And then we've got this guy who apparently we never added any skills to whatsoever. I'm not sure how he snuck through, but, nice. Oh, no, I forgot. I'll bet this is our yeah, we gave him all the appraiser skills. That's right. He's our proper. We did an actual expedition leader this time. You ought to be congratulating. You're actually going to be a noble, which means that you're going to be first on the atom smashing block if you start giving me problems. All right. So we've set those up, but remember, they're all pending until you commit the changes. Always commit your changes before you're done. Now that that's done, those guys have the labor actually assigned in Dwarf Fortress. We'll pop back over here, unpause the game again, and a couple of dwarves will go pick up the axes. They'll bring the axes to the trees. They cut the trees. Logs rain down from the sky. Not many because this is saguaro and not, something useful. The feather tree is going to give us more wood than the others by a long shot. We're going to need those cave trees in a bad way. Make a lot of feather beds, though. All right. So let's go ahead and make at least one unit of charcoal. And one of our guys will come along who's not busy at the moment and do that. Drag a log, make it into charcoal, and then that charcoal can be used to start the fuel cycle on the coke. While we're at it, why don't we build another workshop for our carpenter? Get him processing what items we have. And again, I brought all this gabbro specifically for that purpose. We'll again put this on repeat because it needs to be, and someone will come along and start making that coke into coal, and that will start up our fuel cycle. After a couple of passes through the fuel cycle, it's safe to put the bronze back on because you'll produce far more coke as long as it's in the rotation than you will use it. So he'll go grab a coal boulder and drag it up here. There he goes. And he'll produce us a unit of coal. And then at that point, we can make other metal objects if we need to. All right, so we've got our carpenter up and running. Let's make a few beds, buckets, bins, the usual materials we're going to need to get our fortress up and running. Beds is probably going to be the most important thing right off because we don't have any, and having your dwarves sleep on the sand and soil is no longer as viable as it was in the past. 10 beds, we only have 7 dwarves, so this gives us a little bit of leeway if we need a bed or two for something else. It probably won't handle our first migrant wave, but a couple extra beds isn't going to kill us. We're going to use them at some point. So there's our dining room. We're going to go downstairs one more floor and dig out a couple more of these circular floors. The intent here is that these are going to basically look like, if you want to envision them as a stack of pancakes, that's where we are. And yes, that is fire clay, that red stuff there. This is fire clay, all of this. Yes, we can make porcelain. Yeah. I don't think we have sand, though. I think we have, I'll have to double check on that biome to the south and see if maybe we winged the sand with that. But I don't think we have any sand, so glass working is probably going to be out, but that's okay. We can make do with the porcelain on the stuff we can make. It'll work. Once we get magma forges up and running, we'll really start to dig into porcelain. I don't normally mess with it too much in the early fort when we're still running on coal because it's as big a consumer of fuel as metalsmithing, and the metalsmithing makes the type of wealth that you can stab a goblin with, whereas clay makes the kind of wealth that brings the goblins in. Now keep in mind what I'm doing here only works because I've already used dig circle to set it up. If you haven't set up dig circle this way, you can't use the hotkey in this fashion. But now I can hit Shift F8 and presto, there's a circle. Go down a floor, Shift F8, presto, a circle. Go up a floor, Shift F8, presto, a circle. Repeat as needed. This allows me to very quickly designate as many floors as I like for the same pattern all the way up through my fortress. Effectively a stack of pancakes as you go down through the world. Now the advantage to this type of design is that everything is fairly close to everything else within the stack. Um, sure, it's 15 floors to go from top to bottom, but if you build your fortress on one floor, it's going to be 30 squares from workshop to work pile and so forth, back and forth, back and forth. You're simply not going to have enough room to put everything close to everything else. Now you can organize things to a degree on one floor, and it's nice if you want to be able to see everybody at once, but the more spread out everything gets, the longer the pathfinding gets, the slower everybody goes, the longer everything takes. It's not worth it, generally speaking. So these forts, where everything is vertical in nature, will tend to run more efficiently, more effectively for longer than trying to dig everything out on a single floor. So stop thinking in terms of digging out everything on a single floor like a human would, or building on a single floor like a human would, and start taking advantage of the verticality of your map, because it's not only more efficient and more effective, but it makes everything run faster. Your industries will have all their stockpiles close by, even if you don't arrange for specialized staircases next to a stockpile or anything even more complex than this. It's a very simple design. It'll work just about everywhere you go. If we unpause, our miners should come tearing down through here to actually do some mining. There they go. Our carpenter is producing stuff there. Oops, let's go back down. Let's make a couple more metal objects here just so we have them done. Let's go ahead and make a couple more bronze pieces here. In particular, we're going to want picks and battle axes to start. Now, generally speaking, I like to use war hammers for one of my squads because certain objects are best dealt with blunt weapons. And I'll have another set with axes and typically a third set with spears if I can do it. Um, and then we'll typically give all of the civilians, everybody in the fortress, will be in an unassigned military squad where they get a crossbow and a big pile of wooden bolts normally. Now, we probably aren't going to be able to pull off the wooden bolts in this map because, well, there's no wood. But we'll have to see what we're going to do instead, because not being able to have a civilian uh, darken the sky with your bolts kind of force actually cuts into our military power a little bit. So let's go ahead and get our battle axes going so we can cut the remaining trees and our picks going so we can turn everybody into miners at once if we want to. And yeah, that's more picks than we technically need. Don't worry, migrants will arrive. They will need those picks. Our metalsmith will effectively siphon some coal out of the coke out of the cycle that this guy is on. He's producing all of our coke. Now that we've gotten a little bit of coke built up, we can go ahead and put the bronze back in the cycle and let it run as well on repeat until it runs out of bronze materials, which will happen in about 10 cycles, I want to say. Probably far less than the actual coal we've dug out down here or will dig out down here. By the time we're done, there's, I don't know, 6 or 8 units right there off the top of my head without even digging into the walls. Each one of those is going to produce, I want to say, 5 units of coke by the time you use up a unit of coke to make more over and above what you would get to put in. So this cycle is net positive until we run out of coke at this point. Well, the first day you didn't miss anything other than setup. Day one was just setup. Pre-embark stuff, right up to the point where we actually fired it off. And then we paused it and saved it for today. And that's where we are. Now, we haven't yet done, and we need to do, a Mason's Workshop. And ordinarily, I would put the Mason's Workshop in that burrow, but moving boulders is hard. They're heavy. So we're going to let our guys dig out one of these rooms, and I'll build a temporary Mason space close to this main stairwell where the boulders are quickly accessible and don't have to be moved far for the Mason. This will do. And the Mason is going to make us some basic furniture, and it doesn't matter what we use, but I brought the Gabbro for that purpose, so we'll just use it. And we'll disassemble it and move it somewhere else later once it's served its purpose. But for right now, as our miners continue to manufacture all these boulders, having somebody right on hand to consume them would be useful. Unfortunately, the guy that's doing the masonry at the moment is also our primary coke manufacturer, our coke dealer. Anyway. So let's go take a peek over here. We want our mason to be kind of done doing this furnace operating stuff. Let the other guy, our weaponsmith, take over for that and do his own furnace operating as he needs to. We need to get our mason making blocks and tables and chairs. And just in case we were worried, we can check into what's in here. And they've built up a full screen and a half of coke. We're not going to consume that much. And he's getting ready to make another cycle because he was in the middle of one before I turned him off of that labor. He'll finish up and then he'll move on to his masonry. And the other guy should take over at that point, which is good because we kind of need him to. Now, one thing I didn't do, or I did do here that I didn't actually call out specifically that I normally would, is below this surface area, this is actually a solid floor here. We did not actually dig anything out on the level immediately below the surface. We did dig out a level below that. Now, there's a reason for this, and it's not important right at the moment, but it can be important later in your fortress, and it can be a big problem. Here's the deal. If you imagine a stack of pancakes, the skin on each pancake isn't very thick. So if you drop a big, heavy, sharp object on that pancake, like a knife, it goes straight through the stack of pancakes from top to bottom. The same happens if you drop a heavy object on top of your fortress and it's built in this pattern. It goes through those little thin floors, straight through them from top to bottom, and it doesn't stop until it hits a solid floor, that is to say, a wall. So in our fortress, for example, if I manage to somehow drop something heavy, and by heavy here I mean falling logs, falling boulders, cave-in type stuff, then it would punch a hole in this floor, and it would carry on down through every floor until it hit this one, because this is the first solid floor that's left. So we would have a giant hole straight down through our fort, which is problem A. But problem B is anything between where it started and where it stopped gets pancaked along the way, possibly fatally. We don't want that. So there's a couple ways you can avoid it. The first way is you don't dig out this top surface layer, or you cull all the trees and then make it so that no more will grow above your surface layer here, which is what we'll do. But you want to make sure that if you dig out like I've done here, this floor right below the surface, that you don't cut trees above it. Because if you do, punches a hole in the surface floor, punches straight on down all the way through, bang, 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 floor after floor after floor after floor, and it kills every dwarf all the way down in a straight line. Bad news. Don't do it. It's an easy mistake to make. So, we've already cut the trees, which is a good start. But the question then becomes, well, how do you keep them from regrowing? And the answer is there's a couple ways, but we're going to use a trick because I'm lazy and I don't want my dwarves to have to do any more work than they absolutely must to make my fortress run. So we're going to go over to our staircase. I'm going to designate out the stairwell up and down, and we're going to go up to this floor and dig it out like we would have before. And then I'm going to go over here and tell it we want the whole floor. And now we're going to go up one floor and look at where that puts us. Now notice I'm double checking. There are no trees. These are shrubs. They don't count. There are no trees in this area, and that's important because we don't want there to be any if we're going to dig this area out below us. And then we cheat. We create a stockpile. It doesn't matter what it's for. We're going to set it to have nothing in it. So this is a custom stockpile with custom settings, and the custom settings are block all. So this stockpile takes nothing. Its entire purpose is to be a stockpile that holds nothing. I don't intend to put anything in it at any time. Oops, I managed to get off marker there. That's not good. Okay, we'll trim this back a little bit because it's a little bigger than we need it. Now, I'm using a stockpile because stockpiles require no labor, but stockpiles do prevent tree growth, unless it's been changed, and I don't believe it has. So you can use a stockpile as a no labor ground cloth for your dwarves to prevent tree growth. So no trees will grow above this while that stockpile is there. Now, later on, in order for this to be aesthetically pleasing, we'll probably replace it with an actual floor or road or something similar. But to start off, we can slap down the stockpile, do the digging, and come back later when there's materials. For right now, all this is basically a standing provision that your dwarves have been told if you find a tree in this area, you uproot it and burn it with extreme prejudice. And it's taken care of behind the scenes, if you will. Now, the stockpile doesn't prevent that issue I talked about earlier. If I had a tree and I cut a hole here and a tree grew right in the middle of this thing and I cut it down above that, even though there's a stockpile here, it doesn't care. It punches a hole through the stockpile, hole through the floor, and all the way down just like before. That doesn't save you. It just prevents the trees from sprouting underneath this stockpile area. So no trees will grow above this while we're doing this. Now, you'll notice that this is another up-down staircase, and that's intentional because eventually we'll punch a hole here and we'll build up a small ring fort right in this area here with a small moat and a drawbridge to let people in and out, just as an access point. We'll floor it over, we'll give it some archery space, and it becomes basically a pillbox entrance, if you will. Um, we'll put some hatches down, make it into a barracks, and it becomes a guard room. And it'll kind of develop at that point further on. We'll build an outer wall inside with it, so we'll have an inner moat and an outer moat. We'll use a dry moat because dry moats are superior to wet moats in Dwarf Fortress. Most things can swim, and the very few things that can't probably are going to get in anyway. Birds don't care about swimming, but they can fly over the walls, so why do they care? So we'll let our miners go because they've got a lot of work ahead of them. You'll notice that they kind of carve out with floors rather than going floor by floor. They kind of decide which floor they want to be on, and they kind of meander through that floor for a while and then move to another floor. If you want to prevent this behavior, make sure you're designating one floor at a time. I'm not too concerned about it at this point. I've got two proficient miners, and I got a lot of other laborers that's got to get done in the meantime. So these guys are going to have a bit of a head start on the rest of my guys. The carpenter's going to, even once he finishes this, I got a whole pile of other tasks he's going to do. This guy's going to be cranking out weapons for a while. Even once he finishes that, I'm going to start making him on battle axes instead of picks. And once we've got a set of, 10 each of those, that gives us a supply for pretty much all the way through the game. We'll have enough picks and battle axes to take us all the way through. Not enough for. Actually, lava mode is not best mode. Believe it or not, it's not. There are things that swim in lava. There is nothing that swims in empty space except birds, and remember, they're going to get in anyway. Lava moat, best moat for most things, but not everything. Dry moat, best moat. Dry moat with overhang, best moat. Yeah, but if you put the overhang over it, it can't climb out on the inside. And that is what we will do. Oh, you are not kidding. And unfortunately, our moat's going to be dug in soil, so unless we dig it really deep, I'm not going to have a way to smooth the walls at all. So overhang is pretty much our only option at that point. So what this is going to look like from an exterior view is our fortress is going to look like it has a girdle around it at ground level, 1 square out. That's just going to be basically a plate of flooring surrounding our fortress, with the intent that anything that goes down into the moat and tries to climb up the inner wall will bang its head on the underside of the ceiling and have nowhere to go. That prevents anybody from climbing into our fortress. And then we simply need to make the moat wide enough and deep enough, a couple floors is good, so that nobody can jump to catch the overhang. And then we're in good shape. Check in on our miners again. Yep, getting there. Getting there. They've gone on break, haven't they? Lazy bastards. Sure enough, sitting around the wagon, boozing it up. All right. Okay, guys are falling asleep on the job here. That's not good. Come on. Where's our miners at? Oops. Let's do something else. Kind of speed them up a little bit because I need to get a couple of these floors dug out in particular before I worry too much about the rest. So while I'm going to eventually dig out these squares, I can kind of cut them off in the meantime and let them dig out the stuff in the middle. And we'll come back and fill this in a minute and get them to dig out a couple floors where we really need the space bad for an emergency barracks slash hospital. And we freed up our mason. Did we actually tell him to make anything? We didn't, did we? Clumsy, 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 clumsy. Okay. So let's get that done. Starting with a whole pile of tables. Oops. Don't care about the material in this case. And our mason should get busy if he's not doing something else, cranking out masonry. Because he's the only person who can do that job. There he goes. He's going to make us a bunch of tables. We'll make a bunch of chairs, and then we'll set up our rudimentary dining room. Is it still raining human blood upstairs? Anybody know? Yep. Human blood all the time. All right. Mason's doing his thing. Miners are doing their thing. Looking good. Check the units system. Uh-oh, we got guys not doing things. Our carpenter has run through the jobs we gave him. Our planter doesn't have anything to plant because we haven't started planting anything. And our expedition leader is being a useless noble like, well, expedition leaders are wont to do. Let's fix some of this. First off, we'll put the useless noble to work since we don't have any more wood to cut, mining rocks. Tell our noble to start making big rocks into little rocks, and assist our miner. Will he be as effective as they are? Hell fucking no. But here's the thing about mining. It used to be in the old days the skill of your miner determined how much stone you get, and now that's pretty well fixed. The only difference is how fast they go through the stone to be gone through. So you can achieve a massive mining operation in one of two ways. You can have a couple of really skilled miners who will cut through their stones individually very quickly, and eventually they'll clear out the whole area. Or you can make 30 or 40 picks, assign an entire mass of unskilled dwarves to do it. They each handle one block apiece, and they all do 30 blocks at a time. Bang, 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 and the next thing you know, they've finished. In the current version, while mining is a mutable skill, and you don't want to develop it on people who don't have something better necessarily, it's not necessarily critical that you don't have the mine. So I often want to have squads of miners, say up to 10 in some cases, doing the massive excavations I need them to do. Keep in mind, the more we excavate, the slower things get because of pathfinding. So that takes care of our noble. He'll have something to do. But our farmer is still not occupied, and we really don't want him on woodcutting anymore because he's got other jobs we need him to be doing. In particular, we need him to be planting things, and he's not doing that now. And our carpenter just needs more jobs assigned, so we can fix that too. So let's get our planter planting and our carpenter carpentering. Okay, so in addition to all these plots, I also set up a few stockpiles, and it deserves a mention here to talk about. We're in the age of myth, for the record. Someone was asking what what age our embark happened in. It's the age of myth. We didn't run history long enough to enter a new age. Now, in addition to the farm plots, I built several stockpiles, and it kind of deserves a mention here because this is intentional to fix a problem that new players will often run into. And the problem exists like this. Your farmers need seeds to plant, and seeds are stored in barrels. The barrels are stored in stockpiles. Now, the barrels have two uses. They're used to hold the seeds that are used to plant, and they're used to pick up the seeds when seeds are generated elsewhere in your fortress. So, Urist McDiner heads over to the dining room to get himself a nice plump helmet. He snags a plump helmet, he runs down to the dining room, he scarfs that sucker down and heads off to whatever it was he was doing in the first place. Meanwhile, he leaves behind a seed. Urist McHauler grabs the barrel full of seeds, takes off after the dining room to get that one seed and bring it back. So when he's got the barrel, it's in motion, nobody else can use it. So all the seeds in the barrel are in motion and nobody else can use them either. And that causes a problem because if you've only got one barrel of seeds, for example, your entire fortress's stockpile of seeds can go AWOL at a moment's notice because some hauler picked it up and took it to go get one seed somewhere on the map. And that can really end badly if he went to go pick up a seed, say, outside somewhere, and then he dies with the barrel in his hands. You don't want that either. So, how do we get around this problem? Well, we create two stockpiles. One will take seeds, but no barrels. And the other will take seeds in barrels, but it will only take from the first stockpile. So stockpile one is raw seeds, nothing else, and it gives to the second stockpile, which holds our seeds in barrels. At that point, when your farmer wants to plant, the seeds are always in the barrels. They're always sitting in the stockpile full of barrels. And since that stockpile can't accept seeds from anywhere other than the first stockpile, anytime somebody needs to move the barrel of seeds to pick up seeds, they're moving it about 2 steps. 2 steps over, pick up the seed, 2 steps back, drop off the barrel. Done. You're technically it's possible to have your farmers complain about the seeds being in motion during that time frame, but it's not likely to happen often enough to be a problem. Whereas if you've got one barrel and all your farmers are tied up, you're not planting anything, which means you're not making booze down the road and you're not making food down the road, and that'll screw you. Yeah, linking stockpiles is one of the first things that a new player can really dig into and maximize their fortress's ability to do things. It allows you to set up stockpiles that are linked to workshops. I want a workshop that makes cut gems, and the only gems I want them to make are whatever I happen to stick in this stockpile. And then I can just set the stockpile to pick up whatever loose gems or crap gems I don't care about, have them immediately delivered to the stockpile. The gem cutter just grinds them all out as soon as they arrive. The end, done. No mess, no fuss, no thinking about it. Away you go. You can use stockpiles to direct flows of resources throughout your fortress. For example, when you want to cook, having the stockpiles near the kitchens allows you to control what your kitchen workers are actually going to cook. Kitchen workers don't like to go anywhere. They want stuff that's close by, generally speaking. So if they're adjacent to a stockpile that has exactly the materials in it, usually they'll tend to prefer it. Now, there's a couple of exceptions. They're funny about making stuff out of dwarven syrup and booze occasionally, but generally speaking, you can force them to do what you want in that way by having them arranged in such a way that the stockpiles make it more convenient to do what you want rather than doing what they might like. If you're creative, there's really no limit to your stockpile chains. You could have uh, a small stockpile on every floor whose sole purpose was to slowly move stuff down the fortress and allow you to gauge how badly overflowed your main stockpile was. By virtue of as that stockpile filled up and its whole purpose was to give to your main stockpile, you'd know exactly how far backlogged you were. And we're actually going to take advantage of that to an extent here. This center stockpile holds only plants, and it doesn't take barrels, although I'm going to allow it to. The entire purpose here is that as your farmers plant, they'll take 2 steps, drop the plants off, and immediately come back. Rather than wandering down 3 floors or 4 floors to wherever the food stockpile is, they'll just drop it off adjacent. It's close, you don't have to go anywhere. Done. Problem solved. Your farmers are back to work immediately, farm production is maximized. This isn't the most optimal setting. I'm sure if you played around with the geometry of the design here, you could probably get yourself a better design where the stockpiles are more optimized. This is just pretty and it looks nice and it's good enough. So this is what I use, and it'll work pretty well everywhere. This is something I do in all my forts pretty much. You're going to see this standard chain of stockpiles for plants and seeds in every fort because seed spam is the devil. And yes, you can forbid foods from being cooked, but stockpiling them allows you to encourage while not necessarily disallowing. Disallowing can cause you problems if you're not paying attention by having your food run out while you still have food on hand, stuff that you can't eat but you could cook. All right, so let's get our farmer down here doing something farm related, we hope. And just like all the other buildings, he has to build the farm plot. It takes him a second. And he's done. So let's talk about crops and cropland for a minute. We're going to grow underground crops, and this is a soil terrain. Okay? Clay, sand, various mixtures and admixtures thereof are soils. You can always plant on soil. It's perfect. Works great. Slap down a plot, away you go. If I wanted to build in the mountains, though, I'm going to be down looking at a map or looking at a screen more like this one where it's stone. You cannot plant on stone normally. In order to plant on stone, you have to irrigate it by washing the stone one time with a blast of water. Now, how you do that is up to you. I won't discuss water for a bit yet. We won't discuss moving water around. Easy ways include punching a hole in one of the ponds on the surface and having the water wash over all your farms and then draining it off somewhere else. That way, it washes over one time, it leaves behind the mud that you need in order to farm, and then you can farm in the mud, and away you go. Generally speaking, the other way you can get around farming if you're in an area with all stone is you could dive down into the caverns and use the caverns, which usually, but not always, have mud in them, and use that as your farm space. Wall a section off, close it in, build your farms there, and there you go. You're done. You don't have to dig anything else out. The downside, of course, is that the caverns themselves can contain all sorts of nasties that, well, like to eat dwarves, and that has its own problems. Mud lasts forever, so you only have to irrigate one floor uh, one time to make your farms. Now, we will have multiple floors of farms, and this is way more than you're going to need, even for a very, very, very late game fort. We will produce enormous amounts of food if we really want to. After a few seasons, I could flood my fortress with so much vegetable crops and booze that we would never run out if that's what we desired to do. You have to figure each one of these plots is a seed that's going to produce, I want to say, up to five, I think, crops. There's 25 of them. That's 125 crops per cycle. You cycle once per season on different crops. I'm producing something like 600 crops. Each crop makes something like 10 boos each. That's 6,000 boos per cycle, per month, potentially. You're not going to burn it that fast. I don't care who you are. If you're burning 6,000 boos in a month, you've got a hell of a fort. This is way more farm than we're actually going to need, but that's okay. Later on, I might want to change over plots and have, instead of using food production, we'll do dye production for a season or two. You can just change everything over, crank out the dye really fast, change it all back. Done. Um, if you need more food production, you can fertilize your farms. Generally speaking, you don't have to. It's not necessary. You can even set it up to be done automatically on a seasonal basis. That's what this seasonal fertilization thing is right down here. You'll have to have the fertilizer first. I want to say it takes potash for that. Um, I don't normally bother. It's definitely more productive, and if you're using a smaller design with fewer farm plot spaces, it can come in handy. But I'm probably going to have a small collection of 5 or 6 farmers, which will be more than enough to keep this farm plot operation running full time with some time off for other stuff. So the question is whether you want to do a large operation in parallel or a small operation in series with higher skilled dwarves. And that trade-off will keep coming up over and over and over again. So let's talk crops. Typically, I do one plot, all plump helmets, year round. Okay, that guarantees you have a baseline of food constantly being produced. You have a baseline of booze material constantly being produced. But the other plots, I'm going to have other uses for. We're going to need some of them to make crops that can be used to make cloth. We're going to have some of them can be used to make only things that can be cooked but not eaten raw. Um, we're going to use some of them to make dyes in certain seasons. And you'll notice that aside from plump helmets, all of the other crops have a limited set of seasons in which they grow. So you can't grow. Yeah, there. Clinodev has linked it. So a 5x5 plot can produce 7,500 units of food and drink a year, enough to support 265 dwarves. So what I've got here is enough food to drown my fortress or export it. A lot of times, what would do is build up a stockpile like this, stick it all in barrels, and shut the farms off. Just convert everybody to kitchen workers and let them cook it down until the food has been converted to food into finished food. And then we can set up a supply chain where we're producing a small amount of food and we're exporting some for money. Finely made food, just like finely made metalworks, is actually really valuable, especially if you make it from unusual ingredients that are themselves valuable. But we digress. Back to our crops. You'll notice as I go through the spring, summer, autumn, winter cycle, different crops appear and disappear because they're not allowed in that season. That means that you kind of have to arrange them in such a way that what you want is being produced in any given season. Now, quarry bushes grow 3 seasons a year, so we'll do quarry bushes on this plot 3 seasons, but in the winter, the only things that grow are dimple cups, which are dye, and plump helmets. Now, we've got plenty of plump helmets coming off this 5x5 over here, so we'll use the other one for dimple cups. Our farmer's not done with this guy yet, so we'll let it run. There, and he's done with that one, so we'll go ahead and get that one set up. So we've got plump helmets, quarry bushes, and then on this one we're going to set up for sweet pods in the spring, and then we'll go pigtails in the summer and autumn. And in the winter, we'll do dimple cups again. That's enough dye probably to keep our fortress running as well, but you can always take the dye and sell it if you really wanted to. And likewise, you can use all that extra wool you're going to produce along the way to manufacture dyed cloth, make the items out of the dyed cloth, and then sell those. Again, every step in the chain where you augment those items makes them more valuable, which means that well-made thread made into well-made cloth, made into well-made dyed cloth, made into well-made clothing dyed again with a leather patch sewn on is far more valuable than you might first expect, even if it's made out of basic materials. Now, one thing I didn't do here, I know that I'm thinking about it, is we didn't make cave wheat. So cave wheat we'll do in the summer and autumn on this guy, rather than pigtails. And then in the winter, we'll do plump helmets on this guy instead of dimple cups. And over here, we'll go to the winter and just set this guy for dimple cups. Now I've got enough food production here. I don't have to worry about changing that one season off. And so now I've got dimple cups going, I believe, around the bend every winter. We're going to produce 4 crops of dimple cups, which is plenty for all, or excuse me, 3. And then this one's plump helmets. That works. Net result is nothing at that point, so I guess we can make this one the dimple cups and go back to our original design where this was the plump helmets. Ha 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 ha! Never let it be said that I'm decisive. So we've got our farms up and running. Our farmer is going to come along here momentarily and start planting something. He's got the seeds up and running. Really? What's in the bags? Food, seeds. Okay, yeah. That's set to give, right? Give to food stockpile number 7. Yeah, witches' barrels, take from links. Food, seeds. Make sure I enabled everything. Why do you not think you have plump helmets? Did I miss something here? Surely we took seeds, right? Yes, we took seeds. Took several types of seeds, as I recall. Yes, we did. So, what up, dude? Definitely plump helmet spawns in that bag. I guess he was just really confused for a moment about where his plump helmets were coming from. Not sure what was going on there. He should definitely have found that on the first try. But it looks like he's figured it out now, so off he goes. Okay, moving on. There's only one guy, and they're not moving his seeds on him, so I'm not sure why he's spamming me with failure notices. Do we have 2 guys set for farming? Did I goof? Thought I only set 1. Yep, only have 1. Yep, only have 1. And it is him complaining. That's interesting. I'm puzzled. I've never seen this behavior before. I'd understand it if somebody was moving his seeds around, but at the time, nobody was moving the bags. It was just him. Huh. Weird. I wonder if they had the job reserved. That may have been the case. All right. Tables and chairs from the mason, beds from the carpenter. So our miners are almost done with what will become our hospital floor. There we go. But in the meantime, it will also double as our barracks. We're going to use it to stash our dwarves while we're waiting on someplace for them to stay more permanently. So we're going to set up beds all the way around the outer wall here, enough for our dwarves to have someplace to sleep that's preferably out of the mud and blood. Literally. And dwarves will come along since I haven't disabled furniture hauling. They'll set the beds up in each one of these spots once they don't have anything else to do. It may take them a minute. A lot of construct building going on in here, so I think we're in good shape. And the first beds are installed. We now have sleeping quarters. Yay! This will be marked as a dormitory, which allows our dwarves to recognize it as free, open, claimable sleeping space where any dwarf can come and lay down. It's not better than bedrooms, but it's a damn sight better than sleeping in a muddy, bloody mess on the top floor. So, in addition to making this into a room and setting it as a meeting hall so dwarves can have a place to throw all their fancy parties, we've also set this a meeting area, which will mean our animals will also tend to migrate in here. Now, that's not a problem for most of them, but it also includes the two ruminants that came with our wagon and our two sheep, none of which who can survive underground. So they need to be assigned a special pasture space so that they don't starve trying to eat rocks. This is just temporary, but I gotta have a place to put them in the meantime. And as it happened, it gave us a horse and a mule, both of whom we will butcher in short order in a moment. But for now, they're meat on legs, and we'll get them assigned to their pasture spaces. Dwarves will come along, drag them off to the pasture, and at that point, the animals will actually stay put on their own with no fences required. So, since they're above ground and they're in grassy areas, they will tend to feed themselves, which is ideal because we can't feed them below ground. Birds don't graze, pigs don't graze. So the fact that they make their way down into the meeting room doesn't hurt us at all. No harm, no foul. In fact, it kind of benefits us because dwarves tend to be happier having some animals around, A, and B, they're indoors where they are protected from potential predation. All right, so where are we at? Okay, we've planted our plump helmets. We're on to our next crop. That's good. Anybody idle? Oh, yeah, all kinds of idlers. idle hands are the goblins' work. Okay, good set of basic floors dug out. Now I'm going to do something that we really won't put into use until later. And when I said earlier that I produce more crops than I'm ever going to use, I mean I produce stupefyingly more crops than I'm ever going to use on demand. This surface area has two uses here, and I'm guessing this bug hasn't been fixed yet either, so we're going to take advantage. Remember, we put this stockpile here specifically to prevent trees from growing above our area, and that still holds. But one of the things I'd like to do is build an above ground crops area for grapes or other surface crops. Why depend on the fucking humans and elves to bring them? Grow our own. Get the seeds, plant them, done. Fin. Build whatever crops you want. Make whatever kind of surface booze you want. Anybody want strawberry wine? Problem solved. You want rope reed? Great. Done. Solved. Whip vine? Solved. We just have to have those materials and away we go. But the question is then, well, how do I grow those indoors? Well, we're going to take advantage of a trick. Sorry, I had to double check to make sure I cleared out enough space. So the way this works is Dwarf Fortress doesn't properly calculate light. You'll notice that all of these areas, if I check them with the probe, are marked as this space here is marked as inside, dark, and subterranean. If I look at this area, it's marked also as inside, dark, subterranean, and that applies to everything underground, and that's normally what you'd expect. But if it's exposed to light once, it stays lit. So light in Dwarf Fortress is more like a viscous liquid than it is like, well, light. So, what we'll do is we'll cut a hole in the fortress roof to let the light in, and then we'll floor it over to keep it in. And effectively, our first floor will effectively become an above ground space for purposes of growing crops. Now, you do have to be careful. Remember, we dug out underneath this, so this is a thin layer of flooring supported by nothing. It will cave in, it will kill dwarves. Don't let it kill your dwarves. Now, we can do that by making sure that we excavate the space very carefully. Specifically, if you go down onto each floor, you'll notice that there's a 5 by 5 square where I'm going to build the farm plots on each floor. As long as your floors have space adjacent to them, they are connected to something and they won't collapse. So we do this. Sorry, got to get my keys right. Okay, and our dwarves will come along, cut these strip-like holes in the ground. Now, the reason I didn't fill out the whole 5 by 5 is twofold. One, if a dwarf, say, is in this middle of this 5 by 5 and somebody manages to fill all the edges spaces out, well, he gets a cave in, and not only does he cave in, but he caves in from this floor all the way down to probably here, because that's probably the first solid floor he hits. If he's unlucky, he's in this hole, and he falls down here. If he's really unlucky, he's about here, and he goes all the way to the bottom of the fortress before he lands, and he's probably gooified on impact. We don't want to have cave-ins above our fortress, so be very careful when you dig out above your fortress like this. It's bad. Dwarven sunlight mirror system. This is like straight out of the Mummy. We've got this giant arrange of Archimedes-style mirrors to direct all the light where we want it. Our miners will come along once they get time and excavate this section out, and then I'll be able to show you the difference between excavated terrain like this and below ground terrain like it really is. But it's going to take them a minute to finish up. They've still got about 2 floors to get done. Slap in some chairs so our guys have a place to eat. So now we've got a crude bedroom and a crude dining room up and running. Gonna need to make some blocks. Okay. Don't actually think we would have to wait on rope breed. I'm pretty sure we embarked in a savage area. I think the only thing that we wouldn't have is sunberries because they require good terrain, and I don't think we embarked in a good area. I think we embarked in a joyous wild, which means we would have whipvine and rope breed in theory, but not sunberries. The problem is with the new surface crop expansion, it's a lot harder than it used to be to simply point at an herb on the map and say, this is ropeweed, because it may not be. Bladeweed, let's see, lentil plants, barley, young tree, barley. Looks like we're going to need a lot of barley and bladeweed is my guess. Caper bushes, ooh. Also potatoes. Yeah, not a real broad selection on the crops here. This is what you get with grasslands. It's pulses and grains, basically. Alfalfa. So there's a few things around that we can pluck in order to get the seeds early on. And as soon as our miners finish up so that, we've got a place to start growing those crops, then I'll put my farmer to work harvesting the surface crops for use. Our smelter is still going. And we've arrived at Okay, I'm all ears, guys. I thought somebody said this was going to tell me what my biome was, and it doesn't look like it does to me. What did I miss? We have sunberries, so it's definitely, at least there's some good terrain here. There's a list of all our different, call them herbs, for lack of a better word, fruits, vegetables, and other similar things. Sunberries are particularly worth mentioning for making booze with. That's high-value booze that's extremely valuable, and dwarves love it. Rope breeds are worth mentioning because they are cloth manufacturing plants, and they are more productive than the default underground plants that dwarves start with. So picking a few of these is really useful. If you can get them growing underground, you can produce four seasons of rope reeds a year instead of 2 for pigtails. So whereas it would take me 2 farm plots to get the equivalent of 1 farm plot for rope reeds. And in terms of value, pigtails and rope reeds are on the same plane, so nobody really cares. Fisher berries can be made into wine. I think some of these other surface fruits can be as well. Anybody know if you can make potatoes into vodka? Can dwarves make potatoes into vodka? I must know. Can you brew potatoes? Come on, channel, tell me, can I brew potatoes? Well, Sinjai, I'm actually going to cover that because here's the rub. If I'm going to do this for 33 days, we're going to run into a problem. The first week or two, I can run this fortress and it'll be solid as a rock. It just absolutely invulnerable if we do it right. We might get unlucky and get a werebeast too early, and that would suck. But barring some drastic thing really early on like that, once this fortress is up, losing it is a matter of exposing it to danger intentionally. You will have to do something to it to make it lose. Potato wine. Pfft. Vodka! Alright, so in terms of fun, at some point we're going to have to do a few things. And one of those things we'll do is we'll embark on terrains that I normally wouldn't probably bother with. At some point we'll probably embark on evil, just so you can all laugh at me once. We'll embark next to a necromancer tower so that you can get an undead siege at some point. But for this first fort out of the gate, we're keeping it fairly straightforward. Minimal amounts of straightforward ore, that kind of stuff. Very, very benign. Potato wine. Pfft. Does it have agave? Can I at least make tequila? Can't, can I? It's going to be agave wine or something similar, isn't it? Ugh. No, because if it was RimWorld, it'd be a lot prettier. Not as complex, but a lot prettier. We'll see. Maybe somebody will kick out that massive donation and force me to play RimWorld for y'all for a while. For those of you who haven't tried various Dwarf Fortress alikes and who maybe aren't interested in the complexity of Dwarf Fortress but want something similar, RimWorld would be a fantastic suggestion. Okay, and we're starting finally to run out of ore. We used up the last of our ore to make bronze, so we've converted all of our materials on hand to bronze that we could. Let's double check and make sure. Did it say it needed coke or no? Tin. That's good. So we still have some coke left. So let's look and see how are we doing on coke. Plenty of bronze, obviously. There's some coke there. Some coke there. Good. Got plenty of coke too. We'll need that to make something out of the bronze. So that's good. Got plenty of picks. Let's make a few battle axes. Don't need a whole lot of these. I'm not going to have that many woodcutters on a map with as little wood as we have. Technically, these double as military weapons if I had to, so having 7 of them to start is not necessarily a bad thing. I could always force my dwarves to pick them up in a pinch and, you know, use them as impromptu weapons for military use. Even though they're not skilled, that's better than having their fists. Now, once those are done, we'll make some basic armor items, breastplate, helmet, just some general things. See, I would suggest that the complexity of Dwarf Fortress allows you a far greater overall experience. The difference is that RimWorld is more easily accessible to the average individual. If you stop and think about it, roll back in your head for a second, guys. We did 4.5 hours of setup before we freaking unpaused the game. That's pretty much the definition of inaccessible if you have to do 4 hours of setup to get to that point. Now, I know, it's not really 4 hours if you're doing it for yourself and not just walking everybody through it. I get that. But the point is pretty well made. Dwarf Fortress is not a user-accessible game. It is not an impossible game to learn by any means. It's not that difficult. But it is complex, and it's one of the most complex games I've ever played. I've played worse. The games beyond this are generally the area where here be dragons, if you will. I remember a Space 4X game that was basically like reading a NASA readout. Ugh. Folks who suggest that RimWorld needs mods, well, we turned off aquifers, didn't we? Disabled pet entombing by default and all sorts of other things. You aren't going to tell me you folks haven't heard of somebody modifying their dwarves to breathe fire. But we didn't come for RimWorld, we came for Dwarf Fortress. So here we are. So, who's idle? Our carpenter is idle, our mason is idle, our expedition leader is a thumb up his butt too. Okay, so... let's see, got our barracks, almost got all the chairs down for our first dining room. Let's go ahead and do that. And this is a pretty shitty dining room when you get right down to it. It's a pile of rough-hewn, crude thrones and tables in the middle of a rough-hewn cave with some boulders laying around. This is a shitty dining room. But that's okay. It's still better than eating standing up. Just ask those guys from Rimworld. They get a mood hit from it too. All right, so we've got our dining room. We've got our bedroom. What am I using all these other floors for? Well, we're going to need some stockpile space. Oh, good. This is done. Fantastic. Before I go any further, though, let's talk about this, though, because I mentioned it, but then I had to kind of break off because, because we were waiting on the miners to get done. You'll notice that some of these squares have changed colors, and the reason is they've started to grow grass. Here is a square that is still under the roof above it. It's marked as inside, dark, and subterranean. This area that we excavated is outside, light, and above ground. Now, once we floor it over, it will be inside, and it will be, I think it still qualifies as above ground, but it will definitely be light, which is necessary for surface crops to grow. So, let's do some flooring. In order to do flooring quickly, we're going to want blocks. Now, you don't have to do this with blocks. We can do it with raw stone. We got a lot of raw stone laying around. But we can give our mason something to do, something useful that will build up his skill. And blocks are much lighter and can be transported to construction sites by dwarves much more quickly. So making blocks is useful not just for raising fortress value, which it does, but also from being able to get stonework constructions up and running as quickly as possible. Now our mason is basically going to take 2 squares, grab a boulder, make a block, take 2 squares, grab a boulder, make a block, and he'll keep doing that until we get plenty. It is smooth. Climbing, it doesn't really matter here since this is a floor. And it's a little higher value than a rough floor in that sense because it is a block and smooth, thereby not rough. There we go. How are we doing on blocks? Got plenty now to at least build out our first section so I can show you what we're doing here. Yeah, good. Perfect. Okay, so we come upstairs. We're going to build a construction floor. Make sure I'm not building it up in the sky because thanks to text by text, this is the surface. This is 1 floor above the surface. This is 2 floors above the surface, 3 floors above the surface. It still looks the same if you're not paying attention to the highlight, the tint of the surface color. So there's our surface. We're going to go ahead and, floor and extend that floor so it's 5 units long and then put it here and build it out of shale blocks. And once that's done, we'll compare the two for edification and education purposes. Now all of our dwarves are indoors, which is good because they're not getting rained on all by those blood. But the downside is we've still got a big pile of stuff that's still floating around out here doing nobody any good because it's sitting out here in the wagon exposed to the elements, in theory, but it doesn't really hurt anything. But more importantly, it's exposed to thieves who could come along and just snag this stuff, and there's nobody guarding the wagon. So that's bad. We want to fix this as soon as possible. And that means I need to have stockpiles for these things. So let's look at what we've got. Drinks need their own stockpile. Food's going to need a stockpile. Logs, I don't really care about. If somebody actually steals my logs, I'm going to laugh at them. The barrels need a stockpile. Sandbags need a stockpile. Plaster needs a stockpile. Thread and cloth. And lye, it looks like, is the only other thing we care about. Okay. Everything else is logs or barrels, and I could lose a few of those and not care too much. So let's look at what we've got. We've got surface crops, underground crops. We'll make this into a plant stockpile. And we'll let that take from anywhere. Unlike seeds, which will spam the shit out of you, we will not care too much if a barrel goes AWOL here to pick up food. Now remember, the only food I'm actually allowing in this case is plants. This is just a plant stockpile. On the floor below this, we'll make this into our brewing and kitchen area. OCD powers activate. Form of get rid of this thing that I actually built out of raw stone. blocks are always faster. Always, 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 always. Now, we don't actually have any brewers, so nobody's going to come along and build those yet. That's okay. I'm not worried about it just yet. We're also going to go ahead and build a couple of kitchens to produce cooked food. Cooked food is nice because it is more valuable and your dwarves like it. It also fits, generally speaking, a little better in your fortress. The downside is that preserved food is often in large enough stacks and quantities that it doesn't fit in your barrels properly, so we can sometimes get more food in prepared mode than we can actually store properly. So we'll have to deal with that problem. So there's our kitchens. We'll go down one more floor. Oops, that's our hospital. Go down another floor. That's open. So we'll use this as our drinks stockpile for our booze. And that's advantageous for us because upstairs is the hospital, so any dwarves who are upstairs visiting somebody or whatever and need to get a drink, it's right downstairs. And B, below that is the dining room, so if you're downstairs and you need a drink, you go upstairs, grab a drink, and you're done. The downside is that the dwarves will actually drink in the damn dining room stockpile by default, so we really want to make this prettier. Build a support connected to a lever, channel around it, excavate under it, clear the area, pull the lever, floor over with those blocks on a repeat. Yeah, technically that's probably the fastest way to get your wagon downstairs, but I don't really want to cave my shit in, and frankly, we don't have that much shit to worry about, so the few items we have on the surface will be downstairs momentarily. No big deal. So, let's see here. Our mason needs to move. He's in the wrong place now. Going to dig the stairwell down a little further. That will probably intersect with a cavern at some point. We're at minus 17, and as I recall, we gave ourselves 15 levels to play with, so this staircase is probably going to get us a cavern puncture notice here momentarily. That's okay. We'll deal with that. The wagon isn't actually over the fort. It's close. It's a little off to one side. I don't normally build under the wagon. That has its own dangers. Nope, not doing that. So we're a little away from the wagon. We're safe that way. Still not caving my shit in, though. Already our plump helmets have begun to mature, so we're already producing our first collection of food, which is good, because we haven't gone through the fish yet, but our drink stockpile is down to about half of what we started with. So we'll move those plants to where they belong here momentarily. Now, although I don't want to set it to take only from other stockpiles, I do want to tell it that this stockpile, our plant stockpile, takes from the upstairs plant stockpile whenever there are plants to do so. What this means is our farmers who are just looking for a close-by place to drop their shit off will put it in the nearby stockpile, and it'll sit there for a second until a hauler can come along and move it to where it really belongs. Farmer just cares about it being in a stockpile. Hauler will move it to the correct stockpile in the logistics chain. Proper understanding of clear the area. When have you known dwarves to properly understand anything? All right, so as advertised, our staircase has punctured the first cavern. Wasn't sure where it would happen, but it happened over here as it happens. So it looks like we're going right down through an edge, which is unfortunate, but not the end of the world. So let's go up a floor and cancel all of this digging that we're doing here. Go up one more floor. Yep, take a look. Yep, good. And we'll do these guys as up staircases instead. Meaning that this is, oops, that should be up staircases, not up downs. There we go. which means that we basically have hit the bottom of our main stairwell. Now, there's two approaches to this. As close as we are to a wall, my inclination is just to shift the staircase over a couple of squares and keep going straight down. The other approach, of course, is if you want an ideal vertical shaft fortress, is to have this mined out all the way down through the wall and then wall it off. Now, this would actually work pretty well here. Our 3x3 would be right here, so I'd only have a small wall going around this one edge that we'd have to deal with. The downside is it's got 1, 2, 3, 4 floors of wall we have to build to get up to the ceiling. And then that's over and above all the mining we would have to do. And meanwhile, all of our dwarves are exposed. So we either need to do that in parallel in very quick order with everybody working to build walls, or we need to go a different route. It's your choice which way you go. In particular, we could, now that we've punctured the cavern, take a look at other stuff on the map and see who's actually out there. As it happens, there's nobody in our caves at the moment. Our caves are empty for the sake of right now. There's some tigerfish, there's a leopard prowling around, there's a peregrine falcon, but nothing out there that's going to eat us underground. So, why take it back? Fuck it, we're going for it. We're producing a fair number of blocks, and I think we'll have enough blocks to wall this off pretty quickly. And what we'll cheat and do is we'll set all of our masons to, we'll set everybody in the fortress basically to be temporary masons while we get this dug out properly. And then we'll build all this stuff out of blocks in about 2 seconds with everybody acting as though they're construction workers. Okay. So let's talk about supplies here for a moment. I don't care about which blocks are which, but I do care about how many blocks I have. And it only looks like I've only about somewhere between 10 and 100 blocks at the moment. Which is probably enough to do what we want, but also means I'm going to have to check to see if we've... Doesn't look like we've got all that many. No, we caught our mason at a bad time, as it were. Okay, that's fine. We can work around that. I'm going to go upstairs to our temporary spot here and build a workshop mason. And this is, again, a temporary spot. We're doing this specifically just to move him out of the way for a moment. Since this is going to be above ground farms at some point, it's going to get plowed under, and we don't want the mason there when that happens, now do we? Alright, let's get him back on blocks. Nobleman still idle. Carpenter, I think, idle. Our mason. Our mason's idle because he hasn't got to his masonry jobs yet. Okay. I want to go back and make a few things that we kind of skipped over. A few buckets, so I've got something to give people water with. Let's see. Wouldn't hurt to have a couple wheelbarrows on hand for later. Don't need a huge number, just a couple. Don't care about instruments, pieces, and display cases at the moment. Got a few barrels to get by for now. Got plenty of beds for the moment. Let's make a few shields. We can make the shields out of bronze, actually. Let's do that instead for now. Now, ideally, we'd be using iron at this point because I think we've got some iron dug out. But we've got this bronze we brought with us, and I wasn't expecting to hit iron quite as quickly as we did, so... We'll pretend like we didn't actually hit it. Move on from there. This yellow ore we've dug out is iron. We don't have a huge supply, but we have ready access to more. What is our mason doing? Taking a drink? Yep, of course he is. Okay. So we've got plenty of crop space. I know what we haven't done yet. We haven't done pastures. And on second thought, we're not going to do it here. This is the lowest soil level, and the reason I'm going down this far in this fort is if we want to have a wall very close around our circular design on the upper level, in order to have the moat be deep enough to be valuable with that overhang, we're going to have to cut it about 2 floors deep. In order to do that, I have to go down to the 3rd floor in order to build. So above us is theoretically moat floor, empty space, sky. So 1st floor falling landed on the ground above this floor. And then this floor would be where we'll dig out all of our useful stuff. Now, falling bodies do not fall through the ground. Falling heavy objects would, but we're not going to allow trees to grow in that area, and we're not going to be dropping boulders at random, so we should be okay there. And then that way we've got a space for eggs, a space for wool producers, a space for meat and milk producers, and a space for utility animals. 4 separate pastures, we can keep each one of those animals separately and deal with them individually. If we need more space, these rooms can be expanded later, but realistically, you don't want to dig out too much. This is a lot of space. And I made a few bins very early on, so we should have 10 or 15 bins right now already. And because we've punctured the caverns, these soil spaces will begin growing cave moss. Now this is important because this is the entire purpose to us digging out pastures. Cave moss acts just like grass on the surface, so this will allow you to interior pasture your animals. You can stick them in these pastures and feed them on cave moss, and away you go. Again, the pigs don't need it, and the birds don't need it, but all your grazers do. So we'll give it a bit before we move them into the new pastures, because we want to make sure the grass gets a good start before they move in. It's not that they'll eat it all, it's just that they'll eat it so fast that they'll starve before it can grow new grass. And so we want to make sure that the grass has a bit of grass ahead of them before we get underway. Looks like our carpenter is idle again. How are we doing for logs? I seem to recall that we have probably gone through most of them. Yeah, there's a stack there and a stack there, and that's it. Okay. I think we'll probably make some more bins, because bins and beds are the most valuable things I think I can make out of wood at the moment. Unless we count charcoal, ha! So we're going to make bins, then we'll go back and make some additional beds. Now, bins are used for storing a lot of the various finished goods. Barrels are used for food and drink, but bins are used for most everything else. Oh, look, a visitor! Yay! I don't have a tavern. Fuck off. We're all full at the end. Get lost. Man, it really does rain human blood here constantly, doesn't it? Sheesh. And we finally exhausted all of the coal we dug out, so that shut off the coal cycle. But that's okay, because we already shut off the bronze cycle earlier. We're in good shape there. And there's plenty more coal to dig out, as you can see. And then we hit the caves. And the caves dive into Fluxstone. That's awesome. Look at all that flux that's going to be right in this area around this staircase. That's beautiful. It's beautiful. Okay. Now I have to suspend this initial construction because I want to make sure Dwarf doesn't lock himself out when they build the wall. My dwarves will come along and get the wall built. Oh, look, he's petitioning to live in our fortress, but I'm not going to let him because I don't have a tavern yet anyway. Screw you. And we'll get that done, and then once that's done, we have a crude fence that will keep out weak creatures. We will build staircases in the intervening spaces. That will bring us all the way back up to the surface. So we need 6 staircases per floor is 18 staircases, and 3, 4, 5, 8 more wall blocks per is 2. 3 floors minus 1 is 24, minus 1 is 23 wall blocks and staircases on top of that. And then once that's done, we will have punctured the caverns, walled off, and the caverns are effectively isolated from us and safe at that point. We can explore them later, but for right now, we've gained all of what we need from them immediately without exposing ourselves over much to danger.
There's some more dwarfs here.
Fantastic! More slaves. I mean, migrants. So, let's talk about organization. If I just pull the new dwarves in, it just stacks them all together and lumps them all in one at a time. Is that a child? Yep, child. Ew. And we now hide kids. Since I don't normally allow myself to set labors on children, which is technically cheating, there's no point in actually showing them here. If it matters that we have a kid, we'll go look them up manually. We probably won't care about them showing up in our labor display or on Dwarf Therapist in general. Once they become adults, they'll become eligible to show up normally. So that's not too bad. Only one kid. No biggie. But we were talking about organization, and this shit is not fucking organized. So how do we do it? Well, we set them by migration wave, and now our initial 7 appear in one wave, and the guys that arrive after appear in a second wave. And that allows us to scan through the incoming migration wave for useful skills that will be useful in our fortress. People with useful talents that we can immediately put to use doing things for us. Like, for example, this person would make an ideal medical dwarf. They start off with a diagnosis skill. This guy here would make a decent smith in general. He has at least some skill in that direction. This same guy, or this guy up here who's not really who would make a decent nurse, also makes a good kitchen worker. Most of these skills in the processing skills, I don't really care about these. These kind of get done by en masse in parallel by my dwarves, so their high skills here don't help them any. Gem cutting and gem setting, I would usually make these guys into glass workers, but we don't have sand and sufficient fuel at the moment to power a glass industry, so that's really going to go to waste as well. It looks like we don't have a whole lot, nothing really super exciting, but we always need haulers. And if nothing else, we're going to need military dwarves before too much longer, so some of these guys are going to get recruited into that purpose. All right. So let's start off here. Let's make this guy into a kitchen worker because we need somebody to do our cooking. And since he's going to be doing cooking, we'll also have him doing the brewing, even though he's not skilled at it. Later on, I'll move brewing to somebody else. He could double as a mason. I guess we could have him do that. He needs a mutable skill. Does anything better than masonry? Nope. Masonry it is. Okay, we'll allow him to do that as well in case we need somebody to actually do any surgeries. The only surgeon in our fortress also doubles as the cook. Isn't that nice to know? Make this guy into a woodcutter and also our chief medical dwarf. Remember, we don't have too much wood to cut, so having our dwarf also be a woodcutter is not really a danger here, but might be in a fort where he spends more time on the surface cutting wood. Since we have so few logs to cut, he's going to spend most of his time in the fortress idle anyway, which is pretty much what a chief medical dwarf would do all the time. Doesn't look like we have anything else that's super exciting. Leatherworking is nice, but hardly essential. And a couple of guys who can do armoring. We've already got somebody who can do that better than anybody who's arrived. So this guy represents our best blacksmith. We'll just go ahead and turn all of these laborers on for now. That will allow us to put this guy on permanent furnace duty. If we need him for weaponsmithing, we can pull him in, but this guy needs time to develop, so we're just going to switch him off for now. This guy is primarily our grower, although we have access to him as an armor smith. We'll turn it off for now and let this guy build up his armor smithing the same way. I generally don't specialize my smiths to the degree of weapons and armor. Technically, it's better if you do so, but once you get 3 or 4 smiths and have a few of them all cranking out materials in the same category and smelt down anything that's not a masterwork, they're all going to hit master quality pretty quick. We can use... Let's see, it looks like that guy who's a leather worker, I'd really rather him be an armorer if he gets a mood. So let's try and build him up as an armorer as well. And if we can get it above 6 at some point, then he switches over to being an armorer rather than a leather worker in the event of a mood. As far as the rest of these guys, not super exciting. And we still don't have any custom professions yet. I haven't really enabled that yet. So let's let this run for a minute, and then we'll come back and pick up jobs on the folks who I know are going to be idle. And before I go too much further, it's 10 o'clock, and at 10:30 my goal was to knock off. That will be 2.5 hours. So tonight's stream is basically all but done. Before I kill it for this evening, since we've gotten our first migrant wave, does anybody have any questions for me over anything I've covered? If you've missed an opportunity to ask, now's an ideal time to catch up. Sorry, Tyler. If you're curious, I'll stick around in the chat and I'll get you a link to the events, or you can pop out on the channel events. We're going to be doing 33 days of Dwarf Fortress in a row, contiguously. This is day 2 of 33. Tomorrow will be day 3. We're going to run this fort for a while, and eventually at some point I'm going to have to re-roll into another fort, because either this one will die of FPS death, or it'll just get boring enough that we're going to be tempted to just have it commit suicide for amusement's sake. But since the goal of this first fort is really kind of to exercise the opportunity to teach new players, this fortress design is fairly basic, fairly straightforward, and while it's aesthetically pleasing, it's not going to win any awards for top design of the year either. So we've got these guys set up. So for next session, we'll look at doing custom professions in Dwarf Fortress and Dwarf Therapist. We'll finish walling off our above ground crop area. We will, I think we've finished or almost finished our pasture. Pastures are done. Basic Dormitory. Need to start putting these stockpiles together. I'm going to forget what I had them designed for. So that's going to be drink stockpile. Yes, it is. And I don't care whether it's plant or animal drink. They all function the same for my purposes. Make sure your drink stockpile takes bins or barrels, though, because otherwise you've got nothing to store your stuff in. There's our dining room, and then this would make a good spot for food. But by food here, I really mean prepared food in this case, because ideally we want the prepared food near the dining room, so folks who come to get a meal snag the prepared meals and head straight off to the dining room 2 squares away, minimizing the time that they spend eating and maximizing the time they spend working. Okay. All right, show of hands. Who can sing along with this one? Vampires are a mixed bag. Werewolves are almost exclusively bad. Werewolf animals are almost exclusively bad. Vampires are definitely a mixed bag. You can technically have them make stuff forever, but they eventually get slower and slower and slower because they never get any booze. And eventually they're just crawling along. I mean, they eventually hit a minimum where they don't go any slower, but unless you're just using them for lever production, you're not going to get a whole lot of use out of them. I don't think vampires drink booze. Blood only. You ain't go drop them dwarves. So vampires in my fort get exterminated. It has been a while. Been about 2 years, to be honest. So, yeah, better. Drop them some nobles. That's right, we got an expedition leader. He's not doing much at the moment. All right, so this makes a good spot for us to knock off. So let's go ahead and put up the intermission screen, I guess. OBS not paying attention to me. All right, so the way this is going to work is the video on demand for this will be available on Twitch for 14 days. I'm not a premium member, and Twitch isn't going to make any money off me, so it'll sit out there for 14 days, and then Twitch will purge it. Before that point, I'll get it uploaded to YouTube, so you can head out to my YouTube channel and catch any video you've missed along the way. No harm, no foul there. You can go back and pick up yesterday's. There's no actual gameplay in yesterday's. It's all pre-embark setup and discussion of init files and embark profiles and items and strategy about what you bring. And then I'll try to make notes for myself. We're going to do rolls and fill in our fortifications and start beautifying our fortress a little bit. All right, guys, I'll get the links up in all the Reddit posts for those of you who got here from Reddit. For those of you who didn't, you can check out the events page. I'm going to be posting each new day as I know what schedule I'll be streaming on. Generally speaking, it's going to be evenings Eastern through the week. On the weekends, it'll be a little more varied, both being longer on occasion and also earlier in the day on a regular basis because I have events and other things I have to do over the weekends. Bergendorf is correct. You can identify a vampire by the fact that they haven't had a drink in forever, literally. Apparently they don't drink booze ever, so any dwarf who hasn't drank in, say, more than a month while you've got, say, an enormous stockpile of booze is immediately suspect unless he's been locked in a box for the last month. Okay, guys. Not seeing anybody who needs anything else at the moment, so if there are no questions, we'll call it for this evening, as this will be 2 hours and a half at that point. Oh, because there's a bug where the tavern keepers force the vampires to have booze against their will, just like everybody else. Let this be a lesson to you, audience. If you walk into a bar, your local barkeep is going to serve you so much alcohol you explode. Dwarf Fortress taught me that, and if we know anything, it's that games imitate real life. I mean, you don't have to take my word for it, just ask Congress. Oh! Okay, guys, I'm out for tonight, and I will catch you tomorrow, probably around 8 p.m. Eastern. I may be a little late because I didn't get home in time to actually do the mowing, and my wife was probably going to kill me tomorrow in a most gruesome fashion unsuitable for YouTube if I don't actually get the mowing done for real tomorrow. So I've been putting it off now for much, much longer than I should have. Oh, Kleinadev, you poor, poor, naive individual. You've never seen a police chief with a hard on to prove himself and no regard for the mayor he's crossing. All right, guys, good night and good luck.